Welcome to the place where we gain knowledge through the lens of creativity. I am Aaron Dworkin, and this is Artful Science. Thanks again for joining me here on Artful Science. Today's show is the art of pollution, and my guest is John Sabraw, who is an artist, activist, and environmentalist. I am so excited to have you on the show, John. Welcome.
Aaron, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So I thought we'd kind of just delve right in. You focus your work really in the intersection, which is in such perfect alignment with the show, but the intersection of really art and science. So can you kind of just give us some history of that? How did you kind of come to want to focus your art in this way?
Well, I'm glad this is a 5-hour interview to get into that topic. It'd be great. I mean, there's a lot of early life things, right, that I could tell you about how I intersect with science, but that would require you to buy me drinks. So I'll skip forward into later years. And I mean, I've always been interested in both, all right? But in what I thought were, I think, very separate ways. So, you know, on the one hand, I was reading about black holes, getting into superstring theory, et cetera, in kind of one part of my life. And then in the art part, I was creating implied visual narratives on like metaphysical contemplations, et cetera, on the other side, right? So interests, but separate. And the funny thing is that really after becoming a father and realizing the full weight of the responsibility of not only my daughter's life, but how her life will be shaped by climate change, geopolitics, et cetera. At that point, concerns of sustainability and environmentalism became central to my life and efforts. So as I was thinking about that, I wanted people to connect better. I wanted a better future for her. I wanted a world where it was going to be magical for her to live in. So I created this very large installation titled Scale. And it was absolutely a total, as I'm sure you know, a tip to the powers of 10, Carl Sagan, yes, definitely. And I wanted to have people physically go through an art exhibition in a museum and experience these ideas of scale and connectivity, because of course, as a human species, we're very rare in the universe that we know of, yeah. And so to communicate this idea and to do it effectively, I really needed a lot of help. And so I reached out to astrophysicists. And this happened to be two people who are now great friends of mine, Dr. Tom Statler, who you've had on.
Absolutely.
And yes, and Dr. Mangala Sharma. And I was like, hey, I'm making this installation. It's about scale. I'm dealing with all these numbers. I am not a math guy. I'm a color guy. I'm an art guy. And they were like, yeah. And I was like, yeah. And the thing is that I anticipated that they would help me with information, make sure I wasn't making a total fool of myself. But what happened instead is that their perspective as people who were dealing with astrophysics and large scales of the universe and the history and age of the universe and how things come together and how gravity works and all this other stuff that I'm not, an expert on, their understanding of that began to change how the art was being formed. And so how big things were, how small they were, how you could come to one idea first as an object, then maybe come into it as a audio or musical intersection later. Those were conversations that were back and forth because we had to learn to have a dialogue about how each of our disciplines had a public-facing view and a professional aspect. And mine was art. Mine was like, you're going to come in and I want you to be impacted. And I want you to be like, wow, right? And theirs is like, let's get this right. We're scientists. We're expected to have this right, And so the first thing is I was like, I wanted this room with 1 billion stars printed in it, literally. And they were like, we might be able to do this. And I was like, yeah. And I was like, I want them to be orange and I want them to glow like the setting sun. And they were like, nope. I was like, no, 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 I'm the artist here. I want them to be like glowing. And they were like, no, look, because at that time, it was the general consensus was that the background temperature color wise of the universe shifted blue, right? It's different now, but it was then. They were like, if we don't do that, we're going to look kind of foolish. And I was like, really? And turns out, yeah. So then it was like, okay, I had to explain what art was doing in the function, how it was creating some kind of psychological interaction, et cetera. And they were like, oh, okay. And then so we had this back and forth. So over the year and a half that it took to pull this whole thing together, that constant back and forth and that real honesty about where we each were at and how those things could support each other, but not undermine each other, right? That created this experience that I knew at that moment, I was like, that is the rest of my life. That is how my art career is going to go. I'm going to intersect and collaborate with scientists. That's what's going to happen. Boom. So that is how art science got together for me.
Awesome. Awesome. And I love how it's all how you were talking about. It's not just, oh, let me just, depict this particular, scientific thing or, aspect of the solar system, but literally the process and your process of thinking and art making was influenced by them and by their frame of mind. Love it. Absolutely love it. So eventually you ended up getting involved in this project relating or surrounding the Sunday Creek in Ohio. Can you tell us about that and how that project came about, what was going on with the creek, and then again, how you felt you could bring value to that situation with your art?
That has been the last 10 years of my career. And it's been great. So I'm not from Ohio. I'm a military kid, so I'm from like all over the place. But I took a position here at Ohio University, and I come to Ohio, and this was right at the time that I got the scale exhibition that I just mentioned going. And at the end of that, I kind of realized that I wanted to have this connectivity, this idea that we have a shared future together, which is about sustainability, right? But that I wasn't really understanding, for me in my new home, what was happening here locally, right? Rather than just looking at a broader sense. So I was very fortunate to have the help and guidance of a small group of faculty who were in environmental studies. And they said, we're going to take a small group of faculty with us, and we're going to go learn about this stuff. So in one of those trips out to understand this region, which is Appalachia in Southern Ohio, they took me to these streams, and the streams were orange. And I don't mean they were brown or they were orange. I mean, something was not right, And so they explained that this is a huge problem of pollution, and it's called acid mine drainage. And this occurs when underground coal mines, because the coal companies, they discovered coal here in Appalachia, they dug it out for decades and decades and decades. And before we had the Clean Water Act and other things, they would just abandon the mines and walk away. And when that happens underground, they're going to fill with water, right? And so what we did, of course, is we dug out all this coal and we exposed all of this mineral rock face that had been buried for 300 million years. And when that fills up with water and there are sulfides present, which is pyrite, and there is pyrite in Appalachia, that basically creates a sulfuric acid in the water, and that leaches all the heavy metals out of those rock walls. So suddenly this water is laden with like iron and aluminum, magnesium, you name it, and this acid content, and eventually it's going to come out somewhere. When it hits the streams, that dissolved iron attaches to oxygen, and then you get iron oxide crystals, and that's where the orange comes from. So the streams are orange, and I'm like, wow, this is terrible. It literally kills the aquatic life in over 1,300 miles of streams just in Ohio. Crazy. Yeah, I know. And so I was like, wait, it's iron oxide. And they're like, yeah, it's iron oxide. And I was like, well, like, that's all we do as artists. We play, half my paints are iron oxide. Our earliest cave paintings are iron oxide. This red ochre, right? I was like, can I make paints out of this iron oxide? And they were like, we don't know. I was okay. So I took a jar, got some of this sludge. I'm in the studio and I'm playing with it. And as always happens, I think in the art science world, it sort of surrounds soccer. So my daughter's on a rec team. I'm out there at the field. One of the mothers comes up to me and she goes, hey, you're an artist, aren't you? And I'm like, guilty. And she's like, okay, I'm getting my PhD with this civil engineer, Professor Guy Riefler, and he needs an artist's help. do you want to have coffee with them? I'm like, yeah, let's get coffee. So we get coffee. Professor Guy Riefler in engineering is like, hey, I'm trying to make pigments out of this iron oxide sludge. And I'm like, I'm trying to make paints out of this iron oxide sludge. And he's like, well, I need someone to tell me if what I'm making is going to be a valuable byproduct, if it's going to be a good pigment. And I was like, well, I need someone who knows how to do it because I'm not having any success. So boom, we connect. And from there, that was 10 years ago, we've been working with our partners, Rural Action, which is a great local environmental group. And they understand what makes a healthy stream and therefore how that process works. So Guy and I were like, yeah, let's do it. And since then, we've been working together. And we recently started partnering with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. We got $3.5 million in abandoned mine land funding. So we are now actually building a full-scale treatment plant at the worst acid mine drainage site in Ohio. We will treat over 1 million gallons of pollution every single day from the one seep, and we're going to intercept all of it so that it will restore and remediate over 7 miles of stream. And at the same time, we're going to produce 6,000 pounds of sustainably harvested iron oxide pigment that can be sold in the iron oxide market to pay for the cleanup of the streams. And that's what we're doing.
Wow. I'm just, I'm obviously totally blown away. This is amazing. And I think back to your titles as an artist or activist. They fall short of the impact and the scope of what you do. It's amazing. And so in that iron oxide market, just as a follow-up to that, are those is that iron oxide market pigments that you and other artists will ultimately use, or are there other uses for it as well?
Extremely good question, and a very important question too, because if we don't have the right market, then our model of a self-sustaining project doesn't work. So there are really two avenues for this pigment. Yes, in fact, I've already developed a relationship with Gamblin Artist Colors, and for the last few years, they've been using our pigments to make high quality artist grade oil paints. And these are available in art stores. You can get our pigments now as oil paints, which is amazing. And they donate a portion of sales back to our project to support mostly student labor. And so, but that's a very small market because artists don't really buy enough pigments to support almost any pigment enterprise. Most of our pigments are made for automobile coloring, plastics coloring, concrete, and industrial processes, right? So it's really in those markets, the industrial markets, where we see most of it going. But even though it's crazy that we'll be producing something like, I don't know, again, 6,000 pounds a day. So what is it? I can't do math really, Aaron. This is why I work with scientists. But essentially a couple million pounds a year. It's like 1% of 1/10 of the iron oxide market. So we think that it's very viable.
Wow, totally awesome. So unfortunately, we are just about out of time, but just one additional question, which is just kind of your long-term goals as you think about this. So 5 years, 10 years down the road, obviously there's the goal that you're having the environmental impact on such a significant part of the environment and these rivers and creeks in Ohio. But beyond that, are there any goals, especially as an artist, that you're hoping to really gain or have, say 5 years, 10 years down the road?
That's a great question. And it's something I do think about. Honestly, in the current state that we're in, with this great project that I've got going on and so many amazing collaborators, I think that what I'd really like, my goal, what I'd like to see is I'd like to see a more sort of ecological and intersectional environment for art and science to get together. And I would hope that if through my efforts and those of my collaborators, that we can gain acceptance for more meetings of art and science. And then hopefully we can normalize the mutually beneficial push and pull of each discipline's merits, and through that spur innovative understanding and solutions to global crises. Because apart from art science projects that are attached to major institutions, I want more citizen science meeting more institutional science. And I want more citizen art meeting institutional art, and vice versa, and remix all of that. Because the more of our populace that feels connected and seen and valued as we address our future existence, the better chance we have of success. And that's what I want the impact of my art to be.
John Sabraw, thank you for helping us gain knowledge through the lens of creativity here on Artful Science. Truly amazing.
Thank you, Aaron. An honor.